Okay, so welcome to the Node.js Community Package Maintenance Team meeting for October 8th, 2019. We'll follow the agenda, which was in the issue in the repo. It's issue number 264, in case anybody wants to open that up and follow along. Before we get going, does anybody have any announcements or news that they'd like to share? Okay, no announcements today, so let's move on to the first issue tag for the agenda, which is issue number 260, please test, blog post, please test LTS. So I'll just open that up. Basically, that's a blog post that Dominicus has put together. And, you know, I think it's ready to go. Dominicus, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I've been addressing the comments that I saw. So I guess we just need to get the approvals, and I need to figure out a title that is short enough and that reminds people that they need to test an LTS without having to read the whole article.
Right.
That's the key thing. So yeah, I'll see.
What's your current which versions of Node should library authors test against? I'm just wondering if anybody on the call has any suggestions or. So yeah, you don't want it to, I guess.
I mean, you could do a, parenthesis hint LTS.
Right.
in the title,
Yeah.
But it still needs to be shortened. I think that's the only really outstanding. There were some comments about adding information about other CI systems. So I chose not to include that because Travis is like 90% of everything as of now. And right. Travis, that is problematic anyways, because GitHub Actions, they have the sensible default.
Okay. So GitHub Actions, yeah, okay. But I guess it's
still in beta anyway, so.
Right, yeah, it's still in beta, okay. So does anybody have any concerns about this going out under the moniker of the team, the package maintenance team? If not, I guess, like, unless we get any objections, we'd send it out by the end of this week. Is that reasonable timing, Dominicus, or?
Yeah, it works for me. Should we ping there's the evangelism working group, I think. Although I don't want to edit the article too much because then it could drag out.
I don't think they're very active anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, I think we've it's been open long enough, and okay. So I'd say discuss the package maintenance meeting unless there are objections by the end of the week. We'll plan to send it out. So, and then we'll do an app mention to the team again. And I'm just gonna say would be good to get. Okay, so let's get okay. We've lined up having it be published. We've lined up for it to be published on the Node.js Medium page. Okay, so I guess unless there's anything more to discuss on that one, let's move on to the next one. That is number 255, which is rename best effort to ad hoc. This is one where we've had a fair amount of discussion. There were a number of different sort of bike shedding ones to made. So ad hoc, as available, no commit, no SLA, good intentions, try hard, willing, open, time permitting. There was a suggestion maybe we needed to be careful because, and the original PR was a suggestion because best effort was actually a term used in legal wording. So we did make a request to the foundation for some advice. The advice was that, this is not a legal document. And in this case, based on experience with, other Linux Foundation projects, this wasn't something we really needed to go to the lawyer with. And we should be comfortable choosing whichever one we thought was best. So in the last comment, I said, from the previous sort of informal votes, polls, time permitting had the largest number. I think it's like 5-3 or 6-3, depending on how you count. So my last comment was, anybody objecting to going forward with time permitting? Didn't sound like it. There were 4 thumbs up, no objections. Anybody here have concerns over just going forward with time permitting? No? Okay, so I guess I'll suggest, so it's this. I'll suggest in the issue, I think what discussed in package main meeting and in issue consensus seems to be time permitting. Now, can I actually, wondering if I can edit this, maybe, anyway. Can you update to that and then okay, so that's 255. CI published with 2-factor auth for Teams. This is number 244.
Yeah,
so I think Dominicus, you're working on that one.
Yeah, I do have a plan to write up the options that I'm currently thinking about on how to solve that. There's different ways of approaching it. I'm still collecting information. There's some nice tools around. So thanks for the tip on the crypto. That sounds actually quite interesting, but I'm not sure it solves specifically this problem, other than maybe potentially, using that. I don't know, you have an SSH machine which has an encrypted thing and it responds, but that's, I think, overcomplicating things. So yeah, I'll write up the options, and some of these options will be like, NPM should build us a fantastic, mega huge tool for release management, and some of those will be simpler than that. One of the things that I do intend to do there is, well, so Optic, the small proof of concept that we built, is sort of okay. The problem with it is trust. There's 2 levels. There's one is trust, and the other one is it relies on Firebase, which means you need to have a server and you need to maintain it, and that includes costs. So I wouldn't want to run it myself. I run on my personal server, but that's obviously not something you want to give out to the community. But also, if some randos start running it and asking people to use it, there's the case that even though it's open source, you don't know what it's doing with your tokens. So there's a bit of a trust aspect. So I'm thinking of collecting some information of companies that already do similar things and trying to reach out to them, whether they'd be willing to provide something similar as a service. So for example, Duo Mobile, they do have remote approval where basically you get a notification and an approve button in your phone. They provide that as an API. Whether it comes back as an OTP or something else, that to be discussed. But there's other companies working in that space, and there's some of those are very involved in open source, such as Alt0. So I'll see if there's ways to reach out to those. I think these are the paths that I will be pursuing for that. But yeah, the first thing is I'll be writing up the options that we have. Not sure whether it works better as a single issued here or as a pull request with some documentation for discussion. Yes, we'll have to wait and see. So okay. That's that.
Okay, so I'm just going to take that note first. First is to write up options. Okay, so this one, do you think we can remove the agenda tag until you
Yeah, we
are ready to
should.
put it back on? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay. And that tag moved until there is. Okay, so we can move on to the next issue then, which is number 241, future direction support field. There has been a little bit of more discussion. So Glenn had posted some of the constraints that from the discussion from last time, some of the constraints that some of the fintech companies are under. A little bit of a discussion on that, but I guess we still haven't quite made progress on sort of that last remaining issue, which is around like whether the package JSON can be a dynamic link, like a URL, or just inline. The suggestion was at the last meeting that potentially be both, but there's still some opposition to that. I don't know if anybody here has thoughts.
I have lots of thoughts.
Okay, well, let's hear them.
It is tough. Like there's no right or wrong way. And just so you know, the fintech one, I just posted that because we discussed it.
Yeah,
it is pertinent, but neither should it drive the direction of the web. Fintech will follow open source because it has no choice.
Right.
Yeah, and I sort of looked at that. I did watch. I wasn't able to join when you brought that case up. It's very valid for sure. But at some point, you do access the package. So at some point, you're getting around the firewall. So hopefully, if there was a necessary secondary HTTP request required, then you would be able to make that happen if you needed that. We had, at NPM, we started doing an OpenRFC call very similar to these. And we had a bit of discussion, which I think Wes joined, I think 2 weeks ago, around this, because the discussion has happened in 3 or 4 different places. I know this is primarily, I think, where it should reside. And some of the thoughts that I started to formulate around the spec as is today, and I haven't had time to, or last month, haven't had time to go back and put that feedback into the actual, against the actual doc, but it seems like the schema as it stands today is like threefold. It's trying to do 3 different things, which is making it very contentious in lots of different areas. One is it's trying to set up a funding mechanism and then identify existing funding backers, right? Another is it's trying to create an SLA between the package maintainer and the consumer. And then the third is, I think I had it down. There was a third, which I was like, it just seemed like there was like 3 different options or 3 different facets to this spec, which I think is why, because there's so much, a lot of it is creating new paradigms that haven't existed before, and it's trying to standardize these 3 things or these 2 things they've identified. There's obviously a lot of like kick up in the community around this. So a suggestion I had was to potentially try to break these things out, especially because I'm seeing a lot of overlap in that spec between existing information that we have in package JSON, specifically the target field, which almost doubles up on the engines field in package JSON, especially if we're talking about keeping this spec inside of package JSON. If you are sitting on the the far right of that conversation and really expect that this contract will live inside of package.json. And you want to have a immutable contract which has mutable terminology in it, which is, I think, where Isaac and myself and Mael have all sort of discussed in the past that we are a bit concerned about having essentially fields that reference sort of mutable aspects of this contract. That then you're doubling up on there's no reason to really double up on the target when engines essentially is supposed to
I don't think it's the same thing. Like
so
engines,
how is it different?
Engines is basically, at least my understanding, this is what it will run with. The target is intended to communicate more future looking, like these are what we will run on going forward. Right, so target is like, you're going to get, it runs on 10, it runs on 8, it doesn't run on 7. Whereas the target is intended to communicate the information more about what you plan to support, like LTS, like I'm going to support all the LTS versions, or
so that engines is supposed to dictate the support of that package. So I support Node 4, and I would be able to put that in the engines field. And if you say that you support Node 10 and you're trying to run or install a package that and you're running Node, you're in an environment where you're running Node 4, it's going to give you a warning, right?
Right, but that's like, what does it run today? Target was not meant to be about today. It's sort of like, how would you say, I intend to support all LTS versions in the future?
So you would use Semver.
You can't say LTS with Semver. You would. So, I mean, in the engines field, you cannot say that I support Node 14 before Node 14 is out.
You cannot use.
I mean, you could say 14 in the engines field, but that automatically implies that it already works in Node 14 even before Node 14 is out, even before you know the breaking changes that will be.
Well, and that doesn't really work because 14 will be a current first, and you may not support it as the current.
Yeah, that is true as well.
Like if you look at the description, and probably it's an area where still needs more explanation, but like those are more. They're not like a concrete list. We did include a Semver list only because, people wanted multiple combinations, but the intent is to have the more fuzzy ones, which are like, I want to support all of them, which are any LTS ever is what my plan is to support, or I'll support the LTS and the currents, like, so that when people look at the package, they know where they can. It's going to be, the plan is to support it, and does that fit with their upgrade cycle, those kinds of things. So it was intended for definitely a different purpose.
There's also the case that it communicates that even though if you were to drop support of a specific version, right, if you change your engines field and you drop support, say for version 6, you are obliged to bump major. But it also communicates that I will not drop the support until the package until that version
right.
gets the end of life, right? So, or I will bump major, but I will support the previous version, which does support Node 6 after it reaches or before it, right? So it does.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because I was looking at like caret operators for minor versions, but this is a major version book.
It's just that like the engine is like physically, does it run, not physically, but like, does it actually run on this or not? It doesn't tell you anything about future directions, plans, or, what you're trying to do as opposed to what you're actually doing today. That's kind of the difference.
Okay, so again, it doesn't, yeah, okay. So that's sort of like a side note to I feel like the spec is maybe doing too many things. And even like the fact that we got into legal conversations based on the terminology being used was kind of interesting, because we are trying to create like a standard, right?
Yeah, in terms of the legal, I mean, the advice was that really wasn't, it wasn't really something that we should have been thinking was a legal issue.
Right.
I've tried to promote Edgar as well, sorry, as an aside.
So in terms of the actual, because we're trying to create like an opportunity to create a contract between the package maintainer and their
contract might be a bit strong, especially if you just mentioned legal. We're trying to share information, yes. Right? Like we're basically trying to give an opportunity for people to say like, and again, when you mentioned funding, I don't think we were trying to introduce any new funding schemes. That evolved a little bit. Like we wanted to be able to provide information so that we can tell how well supported the application is, like the packages. Like, am I doing this on my own? Am I supported by a company? Am I supported by a foundation? So we wanted to provide that kind of information. And as with the recent discussion, that became a natural extension to say, okay, and how do we expose, you know, the different funding models that people are trying out today?
So could we have broken this out into separate specs or separate fields? Like funding would be a separate field, backing could be a separate field, and then support would be specific to, you know, because support is such a like umbrella term that I think is also kind of the reason why everyone is taking different approaches or wants to simplify the implementation, like the ultimate implementation, which is just, let's just go with it being a reference to a URL.
Right. Well, I'm just going to open up the current draft. Like it's basically got those three package support.
But what I'm saying is
got yeah, it's got the.
But by putting them all into the same field, that you kind of got to like take it, or like you take the scheme, like yeah.
I guess the one tricky, the only thing I'm looking at that, like, is there any reason why things like the response and the backing couldn't be in a separate, like the target, some of them, like through the discussion, some of them, like the target, are kind of related to the say the response, and that you might want to say for LTS versions, this is kind of the response or support we might offer versus some other combination. And then we ended up through the discussions ending up with like some versioning information that says like for these versions, this is what I'm saying in other versions. So if you split them out, then you might have some issue with like how do you then communicate that other version information, right?
Yeah.
Like you might have to put the version like that first section here.
I'm just wondering, like, how many people are going to do that, right? Like, how many people are going to have, like, various levels of support or backing for the different versions?
I have one example straight out Happy.js. They just, I mean, it is also an interesting concept in how you would put that into package.json, because it is now released as two separate namespaces, at commercial happy, and you can get at happy. But it does offer two levels of support. One is the open source one. You get basically time permitting, essentially, latest LTS node, and that's it. No, all LTS versions, I think. And then the commercial one, it has the extended, it has a specific commitment to timelines in how fast the issues will be addressed. It has a commitment to how long there will be no major bumps, or if there are major bumps, how long each major release will be supported and which node versions it will be using. So I think Happy 16 will be going will be supported all over the next year, and it will work on no date. I could be making this up, but I think that's roughly the idea there.
So, sorry, you're saying there's professional and an open source support?
So if you were to look at the Happy itself, will be published as two separate packages, right? One is the commercially licensed one, which may include extra features and has extended support, and the open source one. They both live in the same repo, so they are in a way sharing the package JSON, but in a way they're not. But it does have two levels of support. It has the commercial with all the commitments, and it has the non-commercial one, the open source one. Yes.
So when they get published, though, they get published as separate packages, right?
Yes, but they live in the same repo essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think if they have different information, I mean, like, you know, we can go back and we can talk about the content and whether it can be separate or not. I think, though, like in the discussions we've had, it seemed to be that we're fairly okay with the content. And I think for people not using things, it's easy to just not include a section because I don't think they're mandatory. But the thing that there was discussion, and I think, you know, that you've called out and other people called out even, is that you know, there's two kind of schools of thought that are causing a lot of the discussion. One is like, it needs to be in the package JSON because that's the one place in the package we have where we can, you know, you basically get it with the package. We know it's going to be there. We know it's going to be available. And the other side is, well, this data can change. So it doesn't belong in something which is fixed like that. Like a reference, which is a URL, is better because if it changes, then it's, you know, you can change it immediately without having to publish a new version, which, you know, that your change in support may have nothing to do with that new version.
Yeah, so that's why I'm trying to essentially consolidate those, because I know that I guess the best of both worlds would be that we remove the mutable data from the spec and get the rest of the spec into the going forward, or somehow, if we can bridge that gap, if that's possible. If it's not possible, as you say, like
right,
you want to define something that is mutable, then I think that we have to basically, everybody has to get on board with it living somewhere else outside of the packages.
Right. I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, would a compromise, because I mean, these are two binary opposites, really. These are two camps, and there's kind of no winning currently of the conversation. But would perhaps a compromise be if we have it in the package, yeah, but if we have an external link that does exist, that means that would supersede what is in the package, meaning there may have been a life change by the maintainers, they can no longer support the level that they're committed to. Is that not a reasonable compromise? I know it's like not solving the problem completely, but it does solve it in a way that what we want to try and do is provide a mechanism whereby support can change at any time. But we have those people that want this completely immutable way. And for 99% of the time, I don't reckon support's going to change. You know, there's a bunch of people that support packages. It's not likely that all of them are going to withdraw support or stop supporting, but it can happen. And if we have a link that if exists, really, it will supersede what's currently there. If there is information there, it should supersede what is in the immutable, on the immutable side. Could that be a compromise? Because we're never going to satisfy both camps. That's the problem here. But that might be a way. I'll make myself a bit now.
I mean, it comes down to tooling. Like, what are we going to do with this field, right? So, like, if you're asking us to support an object, a URL, and then do mapping when we see one or the other, that's going to add some complexity in terms of anything that NPM is going to, I think, implement. The first iteration that we were even looking at is just like having a subcommand that just spits out the information, right? So
if we, you know, because everything in the world is a compromise. If we just choose one of them for the tooling to work upon, and we make it beholden upon the user that if the other exists, it's really down to them. I know tooling is a very, very important issue, but otherwise we're not going to be able to satisfy both camps and we won't get a decision. What we may find is that if we actually do implement it, we may find that it's almost 100% on one side and the community will make the decision for us, which is often what we want to happen anyway. We provide guidance. It's just an idea.
I guess the other thing too is, my question would be, which of this data do you think is non-immutable versus mutable?
Again, I think it's the version is the most. That's why I'm trying to reconcile like how we get around that.
You mean the version is in which versions this applies to, or the target, or the?
Yeah, a target and version, I think, and the nomenclature that's sort of net new is a bit. Well, that's separate. That's separate of the actual mutability. But yeah.
I'm not sure I know that any one of these fields is more mutable or less mutable than the others.
Well, response type also could change over time, and you're going to have to update the contract, right? So what you're going to have to.
That's my point. Is like any one of these could be changed. Like your backing, it's like, okay, I got funding, so immediately that changes.
Right.
Response,
So
I'm too busy, I'm going to change that. And target, I'm changing my policy, right? So I'm not.
Right.
I don't know which ones are less. And
I'm guessing that those things are going to change more often than you expect, which is why also like, you know, a new version of Node coming out. I guess I thought it would be a reasonable assumption that you would just essentially update the engines field versus having a.
But target, the idea is here, target would not have to be changed.
Yeah, but response. So what I'm saying is like it's every time that you are going on vacation now, or your funding changes, as you say, if this was living inside the package JSON, you're going to have to update that contract, right? So you're going to have to push out a new release.
Again, I don't think it's when you go on vacation. I think you know your policy should it should be more generic that says generally this is gonna. You don't say you get 24/7. But except when I'm on vacation, right? Unless that's what you write into your policy, it should be a more generic than that, right? Well, so I don't know that these will be updated frequently, but if you get new backing or if you get new stuff, then you know you might want to add that in. I'm hoping the idea in part is to close the communication gap. So if you change it every other week, that really doesn't help a lot, right? It should be, this is what I'm planning to do. And you know, things change, but not every other week or something like that. You know, I expect that once, you know, if it's basically something you're doing as a hobby, and you've said time permitting, that will probably be the way it is for quite a long time until something significant changes, right? Yeah. And same with your targets. Like if you're basically saying I'm going to support all LTS versions, and that's your intent, you probably continue with that for a long time before, you know, people don't necessarily say, oh, today I'm doing LTS, tomorrow I'm doing something else. So I think all of these will change, but only very slowly.
How much of this discussion is due to the technical constraint, the simple technical constraint that you cannot have a package JSON without a specific version of a package, right? On NPM. You can have as many changes as you want on Git, but once you publish it on NPM, it stays there. And then can I mean, that's a given, right? Once you publish the package, it has a package JSON, the information is there. But you do have other objects around that. You have the document, you have the dist tags, right, which can point to different versions, or you know, maybe they could point to something else. Is there a way to? I mean, I wonder how much of that is related to the technical problem and how much of that is related to the actual underlying concepts that we're discussing here.
Yeah, the strongest opposition, I think, would go away if it could be another file in the package, which was then mutable in some way.
So it doesn't have to be another file. I mean, it only has to be another object that can automatically fill itself based off another resource, if you will, that fills itself in based on the latest published version, with an option to override it manually if you really have to. Such as,
and I apologize, I'm hopping onto this conversation a little bit later, but my question is, if you're at patch version 10 and you really only want to change the support field, and so you're going to push patch version 11. If someone has patch version 10 and they say you said you'd offer 24/7 support to patch version 10, I don't have patch version 11 installed, so I don't really care that you changed it. Have we discussed that sort of correlation between the version of the what is arguably, I guess, the SLA and the package version?
And that's why they want the link.
Yeah. The agreement was always that it would be the latest, like the authoritative version is the latest published package.
I mean, to the point that people have been making that there's a arguable SLA, like legal risk, right? If the argument could be made that I don't have the latest version, and even though you said that the latest version is the version I should respect, I don't have the ability to quote unquote upgrade to the latest version, and therefore I expect 24/7 support. Like, if that argument can be made, why not limit the risk by having the link and just having NPM support, retrieving that field and presenting that information on the NPM module page rather than having it be part of the package.
Right.
I know the argument has been, well, if I'm on a plane and I want to know what the service level agreement is, if I don't have access to the internet or I want to do my work offline, I want to be able to access this information or any information about the module that I would otherwise be able to access. But that might not be a strong case for putting it associated with the service level agreement with the patch number.
Right. I have to drop off, so I just want to add one more thing. The person who's most opposed to it being a dynamic link isn't here.
Yeah.
So I really think that we should take the conversation back into the GitHub repo. In that, that I think we need to have the people who feel strongly with that in the discussion, or it doesn't matter what as much if the rest of the people come to an agreement, right?
But there is one. So if you drop, I'd like to spend just a few more minutes on this when you drop, because the thing is, if we make progress on it, rather than just going through the agenda, that it's worthwhile. Because I want to ask some questions from the registry perspective. Is if it's the precedent is the legal worry and they prefer a link, shouldn't that trump all technical worries? Because it's the same for everyone in most circumstances. We live in a world of rules, and that's just the way it is.
So I've made Darcy the host. To be honest, like I won't oppose either way. I have so anyway, anyway, that's what I'll say. I'll let you in, but you're right. Continue to discuss, and if you can put in what the result of that discussion is in the issue, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Awesome.
Talk to you all later.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
So Darcy, sorry.
Hey everyone, can you all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we move on, I can't talk too much because I've got a sleeping baby here. It's still 6 in the morning where I am. So Jordan, who has been one of the most vocal people against the link, has said very specifically in issues that he is all right as long as NPM can host something that can be updated and then gets filled into the package JSON on install time. So I just want to make sure that we don't go too far down the other route, knowing that the one person who is the most opposed has proposed a way that he would get on board with it.
So to that point, it would be like not directly related to the patch number. It would be dynamically added when you NPM install. So if somebody happened to clear their local NPM cache and they hadn't changed the version, they would still get the latest. And to Darcy's point, that puts a potentially significant load on NPM to provide support for a field that we get validated is going to be essential. It may turn out to be tremendously useful for everybody, but the level of effort that it will take at the front side, we haven't, as far as I have seen so far, we haven't provided like significant, meaningful value that would help to drive the conversation about committing people to work on it.
Yeah. So again, from I think NPM's standpoint, we want to do something with the lowest amount of effort, but would have some level of impact. And I think that's why through this conversation, which I know is eaten most of the time here, we were considering something that is, and I brought up potentially just focusing on the funding and backing aspect of this versus the more SLA type support, maintenance support parts of this spec, which is why I sort of alluded to, could we break this out into two different fields, which would better, I think, focus the conversation. Backing could, or funding, if we called it, could be, again, a link or an array of links to, the source of funding or where to find that, right? Right now, I think in that spec, it's, I just had it open, so I apologize. I think right now in that spec, it is, yeah, it's just an array of links for sponsored. This is something that I imagine we could support today. This is something we could quickly implement. So a portion of this proposal is something that we could actually action on, see if people use it, see how they use it, and we could even do something on our side to promote that use with a subcommand as it stands today. And it could go into a minor release for like npm 6. And if we want to change that functionality, then we could break that in npm 7, right? So this is kind of like where, then we get the best of both worlds. We can try something out in the ecosystem, see if it helps solve some of the problems that we've seen with funding and which is separate, I think, from this, what level of maintenance am I expecting from this package maintainer? So, but yeah, I think as Michael noted, Wes has noted, I don't think that we should spend any more time if certain folks that also have big opinions about this aren't in the room, and we can take it offline. So,
from what I've heard so far, it seems like we need to take the conversation back to the repo and bring it back to the fork in the road that we want to get to, which like a phased approach of doing step 1, backing field, near-term support in APM. Step 2, if that pans out and we see that there's like a huge benefit or to the group, the community, or at least a wide adoption, then we talk about adding a support field as well as we proceed. But if we find that the backing field, despite our efforts on the package maintenance team of like writing blogs or NPM writing blogs and trying to encourage people to help others to get visibility into where the backing is coming from. If our best efforts don't result in a wide adoption, then reconsider at least the backing and then take steps to consider what we can do to support the support field. And if nothing else, we can at least leave the conversation there.
For sure.
The open ticket we have, or open issue.
For sure. So moving on, the issue 236, standard grammar keywords. Did we already go over that? No. Dominicus, did you want to speak to this?
I can quickly have a look. I think Michael wanted to do some updates in a couple of other related places. And I think we have a pull request open with some terminology updates, which is close to being merged. So that's number 253. I don't know what the state of that is anymore.
And Wes, I think you were the last to comment on that issue as well.
Yeah, I think I built some tooling around what was in the issue just to, you know, get some implementation out there and see if that helps anybody. So I don't have much to add other than it as it stands. The package that I linked there should be usable for, you know, people to write some integrations with. I used it to do a GitHub action to update the test matrix in my repos. It seemed to work, and so I don't know if everybody likes it. I don't know the aliases we've defined, but it seemed to be pretty fully fleshed out to me, and I'd be on board with getting it merged because it you know, after implementing it, it was pretty easy and straightforward. The language wasn't too hard to understand to get an implementation out, so I think that's good.
Sorry, the PR number again was
253.
253.
Just so you know, I'm not at my computer, so I was thinking of I don't know if that's the one talking about defining the aliases or the one with the blog post. So if I gave a comment on the wrong PR, I apologize.
Do we have a blog post for that?
It's add support target all detail.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the one updating the aliases definitions.
Are we? Did we want to queue up a blog post? Is that the intent there?
I don't know.
Sorry,
but
maybe I was thinking there's multiple issues here, and I think maybe I was thinking of the Travis, get Travis and GitHub Actions to support them, not a blog post. My bad. Sorry.
Okay. So look to land PR. Five, three. Okay, moving on quickly. We only have about 10 minutes left. Document the current top 10 Express issues. And Wes, I know you're limited without a computer.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind pushing this one until one of the meetings at the 10 o'clock time where I'm more prepared.
For sure, no worries. Number 192, issue number 192, next steps on support levels in package.json. We essentially have covered this. We've spent a lot of time on support. Unless there's something in this issue specifically. No, and it looks like it hasn't been touched in about a month as well. So is there, from the last two, baseline practices, npm ignore or package.json files, issue number 164.
I think the next action there is to land the blog post, and it does have a lot of approvals there. So I don't know if we're waiting for something. Oh, I have to approve it myself.
There you go.
Yeah, but I think we can land that soon. I don't know about publishing. Probably we need Michael for that.
Okay. Let me make a note of that.
The blog post PR is 243.
243, is that right? Publish, yes. Okay. And the last item, with about 5 minutes left, which problems Node.js open source maintainers authors face today? This is, I think, been open for a really long time. I remember looking this up a while back. Is there anything new on this topic?
I'm thinking about some of the like first week of the package maintenance working group issues. They were all just like, let's post some ideas. I think it would be healthy just to close them all. And if anybody poses, they can open up a new issue with the topic they want to talk about, because it's just, there was a lot going on at that point. So
yeah. So the intent here would be like, because this has been around for over a year now. I'm just wondering, like, you know, what's the help in maintaining this thread, keeping this thread open? Would the suggestion there is to ask to break this out into separate issues if anybody has like something that's more actionable?
I think some of these issues we will want to revisit after we, try to go larger scale. At the moment, we said we're going to try to do some pilot packages. Well, that was, of course, the plan 10 months ago. But I think once we start going wider, we may want to like for this particular issue, we might want to run a wider open source community survey or something like that. We can always reopen the issues, so I'm not opposed to closing or anything.
Yeah, to the kind of thread of this discussion, we should probably come up with some sort of a standard for tickets, like an explanation of what the expected outcome is, or like a template to make sure that these tickets can be closed without, some sort of everyone voted yes sort of a scenario, because that's just impractical in this group.
So a good next step would be maybe drafting an issue template so that you can formalize sort of how the discussion can take place. Yeah,
we'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting, and I can create an issue for it right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, we just need some simple rules for when to let things die. And they never really die. We can resurrect them any time.
I think I'll just remove the agenda label from this one, and we can revisit that once we have the process for that.
Awesome. I think that's all, unless anybody else had any other items they want to bring up with the last few minutes left. No?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll see you folks in a little bit, I'm sure. And or I'll see you on GitHub.
Yep.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.